This past spring and summer, I worked in Budapest on a fellowship at the Danube Institute. I was there for about 10 days before I realized that 90% of the Western media reports about Hungary are either lies or at least serious distortions of the truth. I already knew from my reading and reporting that Hungary was not a neo-fascist state, as the smear doctors and the Western media insist. What I didn't know until I actually lived in Budapest for a time was how far the reality is from the dominant Western narrative about Hungary. I thought, good grief, how is it that we American conservatives don't know what's going on here? How is it that we're not standing with these people? We have so much to learn from them. Eventually, I texted my friend Tucker Carlson and encouraged him to come over and see for himself. Even many American conservative elites have bought the standard narrative about Hungary. Now, Hungary is a normal country, not a...
Before we get the heartwarming story of how Rod Dreher convinced his buddy Tucker Carlson to love Hungary, and we hear how wonderful it is. He's being a little vague here, but he's alluding to Western, no doubt globalist media being very down on Hungary. Why would that be?
Well, I mean, most people don't want to live in a quasi-authoritarian regime that constantly lies to its subjects, and where things have gotten so bad that they're pushing out major universities, which is an ironic thing for the right to be applauding, considering how much they tend to bitch and moan about free speech being a major issue, right? And how the wokists are the ones that are going to destroy that. I'd also like to just point out that in terms of standing up for their principles, we're talking about a regime that very recently was actually censored by the EU, precisely because it's turning into a liberal autocracy. And very, very quickly, the administration decided that the immortal dollar is much more important than the conservative immortal God in heaven. And they're now like, oh, yeah, we'll make any kind of reforms that you want. I mean, when we said that we'd go down fighting for our Judeo-Christian beliefs, we didn't mean that we would go down fighting in poverty. Or see the regime crumble because of a lack of legitimacy, because we won't be able to fund basic social services anymore. I mean, Hungary is not a model anybody should be wanting to emulate.
Yeah, so I think people might be familiar with some of the more batshit insane things that Hungarian President Viktor Orban has said, which have included like literally, I think there was something about we don't want to be race mixers.
That was most recent.
Very recently. So this is not a good guy, but I mean, just to help people, and also I will say, I hear right-wing populists sort of upholding Hungary as some sort of model, but if you claim to care about poverty, raging economic inequality, or whatever, I mean, like the idea that Hungary is not exactly Sweden, let's put it that way. That it's not it's not any great shake as far as how like the extensiveness of the welfare state and all that is absolutely nothing compared to like the Nordic social democracies. But like on a policy level, like what has this guy been doing?
Yeah, I should also say it's a country where corruption has gotten so bad, where the leader of Fidesz, Viktor Orban, has decided to build a gigantic stadium in his hometown to seat tens of thousands of people. His hometown has about 4,000 to 7,000 people in it, right? Just a titanic monument to ego that kind of bears positive comparison to the kind of things that you would see in various banana republics, half-baked despotisms, you name it, all around the globe. But what ended up happening is that Fidesz initially lost an election early on in its career as a kind of centrist party. Viktor Orban didn't like that, committed himself to never losing an election again. And what ended up happening is once they gained power again, I think it was in 2010, they quickly went about essentially reinventing the country and its constitutional and electoral system to do just that, to make sure that they would never lose power once more. And this involved multiple changes to the Constitution, essentially turning the judicial branch into an arm of the executive branch, co-opting the media, particularly the state media, getting rid of the Central European University through a variety of steps. One of the first was essentially banning any program that had affiliations with things like feminism, gender studies, whatever you want to call it. and eventually got so bad that the university just exiled itself. But probably things became really transparent around 2015, the time of the migrant crisis, because many people were fleeing from the Syrian civil war into Europe, and Viktor Orban invoked an extraordinary amount of Islamophobia to essentially say, not in our country. And this included doing truly horrific things to some of the migrants who wanted to come in. But one of the results of this is that more people had to flee to Germany since there wasn't space for them in smaller Eastern European countries, or they weren't allowed in smaller Eastern European countries like Poland or Hungary. And consequently, Germany had to take in about 1 million, which was the right thing to do, I should say. But accompanying all this Islamophobic rhetoric was some good old anti-Semitism as well, which we always is creeping not very far below the surface in the political right, but it became pretty galvanizing where you started to see them talk about George Soros, right, as this shadowy figure who essentially owns the country, who's bankrolling all of Orban's enemies, who's got his fingers in every single pie. And one of the big ironies of this, I should point out, is Orban himself was a beneficiary of Soros money early in his career when he got a scholarship to go study in England from the Soros Foundation, right? Not something that he publicizes too frequently, right? But it's not very hard to draw a connection between George Soros, this Holocaust survivor, is funding all of these Muslims to try to get them to come in and destroy our Judeo-Christian heritage, or Christian heritage, excuse me, and some of the uglier sides of anti-Semitism that you've seen before. On the
in Hungary, they probably leave out the prefix.
Yeah, probably, yeah.
Yeah, fair enough. All right, let's watch Drod.
Perfect one. Still, I told Tucker, there are plenty of good things going on here and lessons that American conservatives can learn and should learn from the way Prime Minister Viktor Orban and the Fidesz party govern their country. Well, as you know, Tucker came in late August and did a week's worth of shows from Budapest. This caused the US media's hair to catch on fire, naturally. But what I hope Tucker's broadcasts were able to do is first to let the broader conservative movement know that Hungary is an important ally to us, one that needs and deserves our support. Second, to help establish Budapest as an intellectual capital for the anti-woke national conservative movement. And third, to draw the attention of Western conservative thinkers and politicians to what Viktor Orban and his government have been able to accomplish. As an American conservative whose writing focuses a lot on the totalitarian nature of wokeness, the biggest difference between our conservative politicians and Viktor Orban is this. Our team talks incessantly about how horrible wokeness is, but Prime Minister Orban actually does something about it.
I want to say just the level of gall it requires to talk about the so-called totalitarian danger of wokeness while supporting a country where the government has literally taken over the official press and is silencing its opponents is just astounding, right? I mean, what does George Carlin say, right? Like the level of bullshit that you have to be prepared to tolerate coming out of your own mouth is astonishing to be able to say those words.
Yeah, I mean, wokeness.
Like, you might as well just sit there and be like, hey, listen, I'm completely full of shit. Just every word I say is just dripping diarrhea. My name is Rod Dreher. Hello.
I mean, yeah, wokeness is totalitarian, but an actual authoritarian government that, the European Parliament has said is no longer a democracy, that has, was involved in, a spyware scandal, has had huge scandals about its treatment of asylum seekers, that, that has not only like severely limited, the rights of sexual minorities, but bragged about doing so frequently, right? I mean, it's like I don't actually love the term totalitarianism, especially when it's applied to anything other than like the sort of original exemplars. But let's just say authoritarianism. I think that Viktor Orban's Hungary is probably a little, I mean, look, I think a lot of what we talk about wokeness is both annoying and counterproductive.
Oh, 100%. Yeah.
But, on the scale of authoritarianism, that's worse.
No, exactly. I'd much rather be chastised by certain people on Twitter for not saying the appropriate thing than have the government literally tell me, "Oh, by the way, your job is gone. So either leave the country or you can stay here. And by the way, there's no more welfare state to support you. So good luck with that." Right? Uh, and I mean, you're absolutely right that this term totalitarianism is wildly overused. I think something closer to a softer liberal authoritarianism is more appropriate when describing something like Hungary, where there are still the mechanisms in place for democratic competitiveness, but the elections that are run are by no means fair, right? They're heavily hedged in favor of the governing party. And that's been getting worse and worse every year consecutively for more than a decade now. So you've had elections, for instance, where Fidesz has won well below 50% of the vote, and yet won well over 50, 60, 70% of the seats in parliament, right? And then it's used that to rewrite the constitution to make sure that it can even do that even more successfully, more aggressively next time, right? And you can't characterize that as a democracy in any way, shape, or form.
Right. Yeah.
Not if words still have meaning.
Yeah. I mean, I'm looking at the, so this is the Amnesty International report about Hungary, about, talks about, for example, the Hungary passed a law in June 2021 banning access by teenagers to material that promotes or portrays divergence from self-identity corresponding to sex at birth or homosexuality. The European Commission launched an infringement procedure against this because this violates EU requirements about freedom of expression, non-discrimination, education. Government still reluctant to ratify the Council of Europe Convention Preventing and Combating Violence Against Women and Domestic Violence, Istanbul Convention, that signed in 2014, alleging the convention promoted gender ideology and illegal migration. Women continue to experience widespread gender-based discrimination. The discrimination against Roma, children from Roma families living in poverty continue to be separated from their families and placed in long-term state care, even though this practice is forbidden by the Hungarian Child Protection Act. More than 300 Hungarian nationals were identified as possible targets for this Pegasus spyware produced by the surveillance technology firm NSO Group, refugees and migrants' rights, freedom of expression, association, and assembly, right to a fair trial. People can look up the Amnesty International report, but yeah, I mean, I think that like if somebody if somebody tries to informally socially enforce annoying norms about language police, and hell, if somebody tries to disinvite a speaker from a college campus, I am willing to hear a critique of the illiberalism of that from a lot of people, but maybe not so much people who point to Viktor Orban's Hungary as a model to be emulated, because damn it, they do something about wokeness.
Oh, absolutely. They do a lot about it and plenty more beside. And I like to say, beyond just the extraordinary hypocrisy of talking about totalitarian wokeness while endorsing authoritarian liberalism, you can also talk about whether or not the country actually lives up to its nominally Christian principles. I mean, Jesus Christ was a refugee. He fled to Egypt, and he consistently talked about the importance of Samaritanism, right? How regardless of what group you come from, you should be a good neighbor to your fellow human beings. What did Viktor Orban do in 2015 when millions of people, women, children, people who are suffering extraordinary hardship, came to his border? He built a giant fucking wall and told them, "Not here, not my end, right? Go somewhere else." And one of the greatest historical ironies I can think of, it was fucking Germany, right? That decided it was going to be more inclusive, open-minded, and liberal than Hungary and this little tin pot dictator, right? So even for Hungary to call itself something like a Christian nation is in mockery of the kind of original.
I think Christian. I think Christian means more not Muslim than it means like actually connected to Jesus Christ in some way.
Oh, exactly.
I do just want to point out in the chat, JB says claiming Hungary is in democracy puts one on a very slippery slope of pointing out what countries are functioning democracies. Are there any functioning democracies? What I'd say about that is there's a spectrum, right? That the United States, for example, is much less democratic than many Western Northern European countries in a lot of ways. That, ranging from the Electoral College to, limits on, other political parties participating in the process, to et cetera, even if we're just doing the bare minimum procedural stuff and not asking any more substantive questions. But but there are plenty of countries that's more democratic than, and, if you have the sort of spectrum of how democratic a country is, out of the places that still have actually contested elections, Hungary, I think is pretty close to the bottom of the list of how meaningfully democratic those are, at least in Europe. And I think you can, I think you can and should make contrasts without claiming, that any other particular country is a 10 on that scale.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, how you define democracy is in itself extremely tricky, and invariably involves very loaded and complicated kind of normative modes of reasoning, right? But there is a spectrum that exists, and probably the Nordic states would be very, very close to the apex of the democratic spectrum, right? They're highly competitive, they're multi-party, there's a chance for any number of different ideological coalitions to take power and to hold power for a long period of time.
Not to mention that they're, moving to somewhat more substantive questions, that there's a powerful enough labor movement that for the majority of the population to exercise at least a little bit of actual influence on political outcomes, in ways that it really can't. And for example, the United States.
Absolutely. And I mean, if we want to talk about economic democracy, I would say they rate very highly there, at least compared to the alternatives, right? Interestingly enough, the United States is now considered to be a kind of backsliding democracy, which nobody expected to see, since it's one of the world's oldest republics. Although I would say that the United States didn't actually become a full democracy until well after many comparable states. Right. I would actually say the United States really only became something close to a full democracy in modest terms in the 1960s with the passage of different civil rights bills. So that's an important kind of caveat to put there. Hungary was a pretty democratic state, actually, in the aftermath of the fall of the Soviet Union. It had a robust multi-party democracy. And again, you can see that by the fact that Fidesz lost a few times, especially particularly to the Socialist Party. That was its main rival at the time, right? And nominally, at least, Fidesz still could lose again, which is why people don't call it a full authoritarian state. It still holds elections. There's still the chance that the ruling party could be defeated, but it would take pretty much everything going well for an opposing coalition and everything going wrong for Fidesz. And that's not kind of fair electoral system. And then the other kind of question you have to ask, in addition to how democratic Hungary is how liberal Hungary is. And there I'd say it does even worse, right? Precisely for all the reasons listed in the Amnesty report, right? Its respect for LGBTQ and trans rights is abysmal. Its respect for religious minorities is atrocious. Its respect for refugees and norms surrounding the treatment of asylum seekers is terrible. And these are not things you want to be doing bad at. And by liberal, I mean, again, liberal in the more positive philosophical sense, as you sometimes put it, not economically liberal. Although Hungary is not a particularly impressive state there either, given the high levels of plutocratic corruption.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And again, I mean, if you say that you have all of these concerns about, global capitalism and, that you are actually willing to endorse some kind of populist, response to that, to reduce the degree of inequality and alienation, which some of these populist conservatives will, okay. But Hungary is clearly not your exemplar case for doing that, right? I mean, there's this again, like the Hungarian welfare state. Some of those people get excited about it because of child payments and things like that. But I mean, it's not it's nothing like the sort of Northern European high water marks of social democracy, which is what you should really get excited about. But of course they don't, because what they really care about is the cultural conservatism which is the respect in which Hungary does much more closely mirror their preferences. But in any case, let's get back to Rod.
I will say he does look like a character in like a Harry Potter film or something.
In Budapest, I learned that the Orban government had removed accreditation and funding for gender studies in Hungarian state universities. Yeah. Now, in the past, I would have opposed that kind of thing on the grounds that whatever harm gender studies did to society, it was not worth the state involving itself in the life of universities in that way. Well, those days are over. We are living right now through an
Got over that
societal catastrophe.
That's a funny little admission, right? Like once upon a time, I would have been concerned when
Orban wants
a country's
to save
premier
his nation
university
from
decides
this
to leave
ideological
because
toxin.
there's no space for freedom of expression or academic truth-telling any longer. But whatever.
Yeah.
This past summer, I visited the government's family ministry and learned that in 2 days from the time of our meeting, the government was going to put forth a bill in Parliament that would regulate LGBT material directed to minors and give parents a say over sexual education in schools. I sat with Katalin Novak, the family minister, and her team and asked if they had seen the Blues Clues Pride Parade clip. They had no idea what I was talking about, so I explained to them how the popular American program for children was deconstructing and queering the family through animation and songs targeting pre-kindergarten kids. All around the table, jaws dropped.
I will say that one of the things I do like about
conservatives
conservatives recently is just the sheer abundance of children's cartoons that they watch. Like, it's a truly staggering amount of cartoons that they go through, have strong opinions about, get outraged by. Like, I sincerely suspect that there's a room dedicated at every single one of these major think tanks where all they do is just go through children's programming 24 hours a day and try to piece together everything they think could be done better.
Absolutely. Yeah, I wonder if I wonder how long that obsession has lasted, right? I mean, like if when, I don't know, in my childhood, like was was the right quite this obsessed with like the horrible left-wing messages on Captain Planet, or is this a new fixation?
It's a good question. Yeah, I don't know if Newt Gingrich in the 1990s was railing against X-Men, being like all this language of inclusion and tolerance for people with claws coming out of their arms. That's a dangerous precedent because it allows children to think that it's okay for dangerous people to be in their midst. Probably, but
yeah, it's not okay to have anthropomorphic turtles raised by a cross species single father rat sensei. I mean, I am there's material you can work with there.
Absolutely, those decadent turtles are destroying our civilization.
Exactly.
Things that woke capitalism and the news and entertainment media use to advance the agenda. Well, the law passed and it caused massive controversy in Europe. The Prime Minister of the Netherlands vowed to bring Hungary to its knees over the law. To be clear, the law does not ban LGBT material in the media itself. If it had, that would clearly have been going too far, and I would have opposed that. The law only regulates material aimed at children. When you look to the US and the UK and the social contagion of transgenderism among teens and adolescents, this really becomes an urgent matter. The Hungarians now have a huge fight on their hands with the EU over this controversy, and it's a fight worth having because the future of the family is at stake. Ask yourself, though, is there a single major American conservative politician who would dare to put it all on the line like the Hungarians have to fight for the family in this?
Yeah, and hasn't really aged well because they fought and then they very quickly decided that if, again, you have a contest between family values and God and the almighty dollar, well, we know that the almighty dollar is the real God around here.
Yeah, please, the almighty euro. But yeah.
True, yeah.
No, it's also like, to be clear, this law he's talking about, it doesn't just, it's not even, not that this would be okay, but, it's not even just trans content, that's also, also anything having to do with homosexuality, that, is barred from, the people who are under 18 are barred from access to that. Right. So the thing the thing that Rod is describing as an urgent crisis here would, I guess, include the fact that like some teenagers are gay, and they might be able to access materials that like this is the crisis, right? That that like if I have that if like if a gay teenager was able to access anything that alluded to the existence of homosexuality in a non-disapproving way, that would be a catastrophe.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, let's talk about the kind of content that they're alluding to. Because I don't think any sensible person has a problem with the idea that children should at least be disincentivized from watching everything, right? I don't need an 8-year-old going to Lars von Trier's Antichrist and saying, well, that was interesting. Now I'm going to be scarred for the rest of my fucking life, right? But that's not what we're talking about, right? What we're talking about is forms of programming that imply the existence of LGBTQ people, and also imply that there's nothing wrong with that it's a normal part of our society, which it is, I should say, and has been since the dawn of time, right? That's what they're trying to target.
Yeah, a lot of these people, by the way, like to talk about Western civilization and and the values and ideals of Western civilization. Some of them, as you know, really love the phrase that I guess they're getting from Tertullian, although they're with different approval, disapproval, Athens and Jerusalem. I
always say to these people, right, they should go back to hang out with Socrates and Alcibiades late at night in the symposium to talk about Judeo-Christian values, and we'll see how they get along with all of them.
Yeah, that's I think if we're I don't always get the sense that these people know a lot about who about the Athens half of Athens and Jerusalem.
No, I mean, there's a reason why I think a lot of these people spend a lot of their time watching cartoons. It's because they have a cartoonish vision of Western civilization, right? It's one that only includes a very select set of figures and ideas that they identify with, all of which ultimately lead up to the views that they already endorse. And anything that challenges or contravenes that in any way has to be discarded or characterized as other. And that's a deep disservice to the kind of complexities of Western civilization. Like, I'd be the first to admit that a lot of people that I don't like fall into that paradigm. Don't agree with Edmund Burke about a lot, but he's there. He's an important figure. You have to deal with him. But so does Karl Marx and a lot of others, right? And again, if you look at the tradition and what it has to say about homosexuality, you find a wide array of competing views. And I think that the ones that we've adopted contemporaneously are far, far better than what we've seen in the past.
Yeah.
This way, I mean, not just rhetorically, but in terms of law and policy. We saw back in 2015 when Angela Merkel opened the floodgates of Europe to the Islamic refugee tide, Viktor Orban said no. He was despised by all the right-thinking political and media talking heads who accused him of being bigoted and heartless. But Viktor Orban loves his nation and his people and is willing to defend them and their interests without apology. This past summer, I went to Paris on business, and the fear of civil war with the Islamic minority in the suburbs was on everybody's lips. I realized in a way that I never had before that Viktor Orban had been right, deeply right in 2015. Hungary will not face the terrible reckoning that France, Germany, and other European nations will, because Viktor Orban was courageous enough to go against the crowd. And this past summer,
yeah, there's nothing that says courage like going in front of starving refugees and being like, no, I don't have any room at the inn for you. We all know that that's the right thing to do.
Yeah, no, exactly. I'd also suggest that his idea of like his picture of Muslims in France seems to be that like anybody anytime there's like tensions or riots or whatever in France intercommunally, that's because like I don't know, all the Muslims in France are jihadis or something. I think is not informed by reality. That I mean, I think that's an issue for the same reason that for the same reason that post George Floyd unrest was an issue in the United States, right? I mean, it has a lot more to do with the internal dynamics of French society than it does with just like, oh, anytime we can't let in, oh, it's good that Orban didn't let in people who are fleeing from ISIS because like they would have turned out to be fundamentalists who'd be trying to impose Sharia law in Hungary.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And he very carefully circumnavigated the more pressing question about France, for example, which is France's long history of Islamophobia, the way that it's ghettoized many parts of its Muslim population, the way that they're over-policed, much like people of color here on the United States, and the way that they're economically marginalized and have been probably since the 1950s in the aftermath of the Algerian Civil War, which in of itself is another whole thing we should be talking about, especially if we're discussing, France's relationship with its former colonies, including Syria, and the role that played in catalyzing the Civil War. So there's this kind of ahistorical bigotry that pervades this entire speech. So that when he says things like, "Oh, Viktor Orban was right," the only thing you can say is, what in the world are you talking about? Anyway, sorry, go on.
Yeah.
Semitic attacks happened in European capitals and even in New York and Los Angeles. I expected to see police and military deployed in Budapest's Jewish quarter to protect synagogues and Jewish businesses. I walked through the Jewish quarter daily going to and from work at the Danube Institute. Well, it turned out there was no need to bring out the police. The Jews of Budapest were safe. This is no accident. One of the favorite lines the Western media trots out against Orban is that he's anti-Semitic because of his denunciation of George Soros. Prime Minister Orban has responded correctly that Soros's Jewishness has nothing to do with it. Soros is a progressive billionaire who puts his considerable fortune and influence to work trying to undermine Hungary's sovereignty and its traditions. Of course they're going to attack Soros as strongly as Soros is attacking them.
Including, I should point out, its long history of collaborating with, including, I should say, Hungary's proud tradition of being an Axis power and killing thousands, if not tens of thousands of Jews.
Yeah.
Soros is pretty active in trying to repudiate that tradition.
Yeah. I mean, it's like, okay, are you actually like, what's the objection? It says, oh, he's this progressive billionaire who, spends all this money. You're like, okay, so like, do you generally object to billionaires spending money on politics, or is it just this one?
No, absolutely, right. And I mean, this is a very good example of what Rawls talks about when he discusses the equal value of political liberties, right? My general outlook would be that we need a much more egalitarian kind of horizon for political discourse where money won't play the kind of role that it does in politics. And I apply that across the board. So I want a world where George Soros and people like him would have far less of a say in our politics. But that would include also, the remaining Koch brothers, Peter Thiel, especially. Definitely enjoy that one. Jeff Bezos, you name it, right? What's particular about these kind of far-right rhetorics is, of course, he never mentions the problem of money in politics generally. It's only a problem when this one particular individual is pulling the strings to try to manipulate this country and its proud traditions into endorsing progressive kind of positions that they wouldn't otherwise, which, again, sounds an awful lot like a classical anti-Semitic conspiracy theory, which is why people keep on pointing that out.
It's not anti-Semitism. It's just that we think that a Jewish banker is the international puppet master of everything that we oppose.
Exactly. By the way, if Soros is listening, send me a check, right?
Yeah, I'm good. I don't know when that's coming. I've filed numerous complaints about the delay. Peter Thiel is a particular example because Thiel is the primary, in fact, in some cases, almost the exclusive funder of some of the politicians who have, in fact, spoken at NACON conferences. Your J.D. Vance's, for example, and there are several of these guys. I mean, like if I don't think he's going to, but if the Thiel slate won, right, there would be in this November. I mean, there'd be like 3 senators who largely owe their careers to Peter Thiel.
Yeah, that's a horrifying thought, right? Anybody who sits there and says, whatever Curtis Yarvin wants to say, I'll bankroll him, should not have any kind of say in our politics, right? And again,
Yeah.
I say that generally about billionaires. I think we could do with less Soros money being floated around the world as well. But I would not lie and say that I would enjoy Peter Thiel being rebuffed that way.
Yeah, exactly. All right, let's keep watching.
Has done to policing in cities where Soros-backed district attorneys have won election. The Hungarians have known who Soros is for years. Now, you will have heard that the Orban government drove the Soros-founded Central European University out of Budapest. It's not strictly true. The CEU is still there in part, but it did have to beat a partial retreat under government pressure. To be frank, I honestly don't know enough about that issue and its particulars to take sides. But again, my normal stance would have been to have wanted the state to be hands-off in this matter. But having seen what elite universities have done and are doing in the United States to wreck our national culture, it has become very clear that the status quo, the liberal status quo, is untenable.
I mean, that's
Orban
understands
that
remarkable
elite
statement there. It's like, I heard something about a major university being driven out of the country by the government. I don't really know enough to comment about that. Maybe I should learn something about it. But having looked at how awful woke universities and how totalitarian they are in my country, I'm just going to suspect that maybe it was the right thing to do. Who knows? How can I say?
Yeah, it is funny. Like all the rest of these examples, he seems to know, a lot about, or at least feel confident enough to pronounce on. But that one, it's like, who knows? I mean, as I was getting ready to deliver a talk at a conference called What Conservatives Must Learn from Orban's Hungary, I suppose I could have looked into that in advance of giving this talk, but I'd prefer just to say I don't really know and glide over that example.
Yeah, exactly. Like I said, this is a guy where if George Carlin met him, we'd probably just sit there and be like, oh, wow, the bullshit detector is going to 100. In fact, we've fucking broken the scale.
Yeah, exactly. All right.
Universities captured by ideology produce a ruling class that despises its nation and its traditions and want to dismantle it. What Viktor Orban is trying to do is protect his people and the nation from those who would condemn it to the decadence overtaking elite culture in the US, Great Britain, and much of Western Europe. Once again, what are our American conservative politicians prepared to do besides simply lamenting the advance of wokeness? Prime Minister Orban is not an ideologue, but a pragmatist. He is a Christian leading a predominantly secular country, and he knows that that comes with limits. And he is a small d Democrat who knows that inevitably the opposition will win an election. This is why he's building a conservative deep state, so that conservative ideals can withstand and survive the inevitable change of power. When I arrived in Hungary and saw what he was doing, I initially had reservations. But once again, after talking to Hungarians, I learned that if the prime minister did not do something like this, liberal and progressive Hungarian elites, which hold the institutional high ground and access to EU funding, would crush the right. In other words, Viktor Orban is doing everything he can to ensure the long-term viability of Hungarian conservatism. Now, let's be clear. The United States is not Hungary. We're far more pluralistic and diverse. We have a different history and so on. It would not be possible to lift Viktor Orban out of Budapest and reproduce his Fidesz party program here in America, nor would it be desirable. But that's totally beside the point. And that point is this. Unlike our American conservative politicians, Viktor Orban understands the civilizational stakes of this culture war. He understands that in the post-Christian era, classical liberalism has been hollowed out by the illiberal left, which has conquered the West institutions and which wears liberalism like a skin suit. He understands that while the left and its allies from the establishment right in Western countries denounce him for his illiberalism, these gaslighters are at the same...
Oh, wait till he gets back. Oh, there you are. I should point out, just in another rich irony about this guy talking about how Viktor Orban understands that really the danger is from the illiberal left, so-called. Viktor Orban gave a speech in 2014 to the Báltusnad, which is a collection of conservative groups in Europe, where he said, and I quote, The kind of democracy that we are building in Hungarian is consciously an illiberal democracy, right? I don't know how you can get much more overt about your illiberalism than saying we are building an illiberal state or non-liberal state. And for him to just turn that around and say, well, what he's really doing this for is to try to protect Hungarians against an illiberal woke left is just an astonishing way of looping around to the conclusion that you want.
Yeah. That's, I mean, it's like that's, yeah, we have an illiberal state. No, you don't. Right? Like, yeah, you must not mean that part. All right, let's finish this up.
Same time advancing left-wing illiberalism with no effective opposition. Now, whatever you think of him, Viktor Orban is not prepared to sit back and watch Hungary's sovereignty and its cultural particularities and traditions dissolved by the acid bath of liquid modernity and the toxicity of wokeness. So what more should we American conservatives learn from Viktor Orban's Hungary? First, we need to articulate a clear vision for our nation. Orban doesn't want his country to be a Magyar Sweden, nor, by the way, does he want Sweden to be a Scandinavian Hungary. He is fighting for national sovereignty, both political and cultural, and against all forces, internal and external, that threaten it. So should we all. Second, thank you. Second, we need to place more value on political and legislative skill. We on the right can be such suckers. We fall all the time for lib-owning, even as the left consolidates power within institutions. If Glenn Youngkin wins the governor's race in Virginia today, it will be in vain if he doesn't use the power he will have been given by the people to dismantle wokeness in the state's educational system. Now, it's not going to be easy, but what is the alternative? We have to quit being satisfied with owning the libs and prefer instead to save our country. Third, we need to embrace unapologetically an aggressive use of state power. Now, this comes hard for conservatives of my generation and older who are still living off the fumes of Reaganite anti-statism. We had better put that aside for good. Two of the most important political developments in recent years is the emergence of woke capitalism and wokeness in the US military. Big business and the armed forces used to be thought of as generally conservative institutions. Not anymore. I hear all the time from active duty and recently retired military folks saying that the senior command is completely woke and in their view, driving the armed forces into the ground. I spoke in California last weekend with an officer who said that the Pentagon is more interested in winning the culture war against the unwoke American people than in winning actual wars against foreign adversaries. Is this true? If I were a conservative US senator, I sure as hell would want to know. This habitual deference the GOP has had to big business and to the Pentagon has got to end. The only institution right now that we have a shot of controlling as conservatives are institutions of the state if we win elections. When the people give our side power, let us use it to protect them and to advance the common good from these corrupted institutional elites who are turning our country away from its founding ideals and making it the sick man of the world. As I said earlier, a lot of us American conservatives, we just love to get together and gripe and complain about how bad wokeness is and how the left is ruining everything. I'm one of those people who does this. But I gotta say, a lot of this is grift. It just is. You have to wonder if there isn't something in us that secretly wants the left to win, that we ramp our complaining, keep making more money. Viktor Orban, though, he doesn't just
I mean, that was fun.
I was going to let this play out, but I gotta stop there here to give Rod a little bit of credit for that insight.
Yeah, I was going to say that really explains the Dave Rubins of the world, along with a whole whackload of others, right?
I mean, like that is a hell of a thing to say. It's like, yeah, guys, are we grifted? Is that it? Is it possible that we're just like eternally appealing to culture war grievances in order to advance our agenda, and that we're actually happier, like to be able to fight about that forever and ever. Could that be what the right just is?
You forgot about the implication that what they also want to do is make a lot of money off of it, right? I mean, that could very well fucking be the banner for like Turning Point in USA, right? We want the left to win, so we can continue complaining about it, and Charlie Kirk can buy his next hotel, like his next cottage somewhere, right?
Yeah, I mean, right. So, I mean, on an individual level, having some culture wars go on forever and ever and ever, so you can just own the libs and cash the checks, is certainly a good deal if you can get it. And on a larger political level, he's talking about Republicans' traditional love of free market economics and the Pentagon, but if you actually paid attention to what Donald Trump did in office, for example, that hasn't gone anywhere. Right? That is exactly where it's always been. But gosh, if you could talk about pronouns and all of that instead of talking about that, then that makes the medicine go down a little bit more easily, because like their actual substantive agenda is incredibly unpopular.
Yeah, and that's actually a very important point. What I resent is this characterization of American conservatism as ever being small state. I mean, I think the term he used was we're running off the fumes of Reaganism and this kind of small government idea. Reagan threw more people into jail than any American president ever, right? There were points during his administration where there were more people in jail in the United States than there were in the Soviet Union, which is a baffling thing to think about. So American conservatism has never been afraid of the state. I would absolutely agree that the ambitions that the NatCons want to put the state to are very different than what the Reaganites wanted to do, right? And those are important theoretical and practical differences that we would need to mince and we need to be attentive to on the left. But this idea that there's some kind of small state conservatism out there in U.S. history and that's something that they aspire to go back to is a mirage. And it's quite telling that he knows so little, or is willing to acknowledge so little about the history of his own movement, that he's still bewildered by this illusion.
Yeah. I also think I agree with Jeremy Salmon in the chat. Says, what wars is he referring to? I think that's actually telling in itself, that because a lot of people who want to see the good of these guys will say things like, "Oh, at least they're anti-war," and that's interesting, because if so, that's an odd concern for him to have. That what did he say? That the Pentagon's more concerned about wokeness than it is with winning wars. What are these wars that he wants to win?
Oh, I'm sure he has a number of candidates in his mind.
Fair enough. Let's watch the last part.
Complain. He makes things happen. He might not win in the end, but this Magyar honey badger is damn sure going to go down fighting. Right now, the political leader of the conservative resistance in the West is the prime minister of a small Central European countries that most Americans never even think about. If you want to know how the Hungarians are accomplishing all these great things, I would encourage you to stop by the Danube Institute table and pick up a copy of The Hungarian Way of Strategy by my friend Balázs Orban, not related, a top political advisor to the prime minister. Balázs is here at this conference. Find him, talk to him. He's got a lot to say. In California last weekend, I met a Romanian evangelical who had been a political prisoner under the communists, who escaped to America and came out to hear me speak because he had read my book, Live Not by Lies, about people like him. When he found out that I had been in Hungary this summer, and he told me how much he loved Viktor Orban. That's really surprising, I said to him, because I know the Hungarians and the Romanians don't get along. Yeah, he said, but Orban is a fighter, and he's fighting for the things I believe in. I know just how that Romanian man feels. Thank you very much.
Had a fun little fanboy moment at the end with that, giddy little girlish glee. I will say that I think one of the things that we need to take away from this, though, as leftist analysts of something like NatCon, is Viktor Orban genuinely is a very smart guy, which is one of the things that I'm worried about, right? Like, he successfully reformed the country in the way that a lot of Trumpists wanted to. And the fact that they're looking to what happened in Hungary as a kind of template for what they want to do in the United States and elsewhere, let's be clear, is pretty frightening. I think you're muted, Ben.
Yeah, I was just going to say, you know, a while ago, somebody in the Gempt in the chat says these guys seem okay with Jews as long as they're far right. And, you know, whether the point of the Soros thing, you know, the reason they're talking about him in particular is, you know, is that or not, I mean, to my mind, is a little bit of a secondary issue. I don't think it would be, I don't think it would be shocking if a far right nationalist movement in Eastern Europe had an element of anti-Semitism to its rhetoric. That wouldn't like blow my mind. But you know, I think the larger point is like, do you actually care about billionaires exercising political influence, or do you just care about this one? And if you just care about this one, is there maybe a reason that he's your poster boy? And you know, even aside from how to read the rhetoric there, I mean, forget that. Like, again, you know, they like Rod just now use this phrase woke capital, woke capitalism. It's like, okay, what do you object to? Is it the wokeness or is it the capitalism? And I think we know what the answer is.
Oh, absolutely. And I should point out that right-wing critiques of capitalism are kind of an anomaly in this country, but they have a deep, deep history in the European right, which was founded on a kind of defense of the aristocracy rather than a defense of capital. And it's never really lost some of the more chauvinistic and ethno-nationalistic dimensions that can be hedged that way. And even the language that it kind of used ate what you saw people in the European far right use in the 1930s, right? This idea of capitalism is aligned with decadent materialist decline, and what we need is a revitalization of nationalist values, which is going to include excluding undesirable people from the country like Muslims and having a strong man who's going to stick up for the people. Now, I don't think that Orban is a fascist. I want to make that very clear. But he's definitely cut from the kind of conservative authoritarian model that really got its kickstart during that epoch. And that was one that was exportable and eminently reproducible in a number of different countries. And the fact that you see so many fanboys like Tucker Carlson standing over Orban should make us very concerned with what they potentially want to do in this country.
Yeah, I mean, look, there's anti-capitalism and there's anti-capitalism. I'm an anti-capitalist because I would prefer socialism, not because I think that what existed before capitalism was better.
No.
You have been watching free public content from Give Them an Argument. To access every single episode of the show, the main show on Monday nights, all of the streams, all of the debate breakdowns, all of the patron-exclusive post-games on Monday nights, all of the patron-exclusive bonus episodes every week, and much, much more, go to patreon.com/Ben Burgis. I cannot resist ending this with, don't be foolish.